Have you ever wondered how medieval villagers made medicine from strange ingredients to heal their wounds, ease their pain, and protect themselves in a world far removed from the hospitals and pharmacies we know today? In those serene villages, where the dark forests, rolling hills, and winding rivers resided in friendly hush, life kept the rhythm of the seasons and the season cycles. Where people looked to the earth's sky and round wilderness to seek comfort when illness came knocking, they gathered roots, mosses, dried flowers, and mysterious powders. They crushed beetles and mixed them with honey. They brewed potions from herbs soaked in ale or hot water, and they tied charms and prayers close to the body, hoping for delivery. These were fashioned from what the land provided and the customs passed down through the ages. In fire-lit cottages safeguarded by roofs of thatch, healing was a blend of watchful attention, folklore, and supposition. The line between medicine and sorcery was often blurred, but in this peaceful world, hope and determination thrived in the hands of villagers who confronted illness with what they had tonight. We shall walk softly into the ordinary lives of these medieval villagers, into their gardens, kitchens, and homes. Discover the strange and even startling ingredients they employed for the cure. Let this peaceful pilgrimage into a past age wrap you around like a warm blanket. In this first part, we will gently explore how medieval villagers found healing in their everyday lives. Amid the slow rhythms of simple homes and quiet fields, they turned to the natural world around them for comfort and care. We will see how common plants and humble practices became the first medicines passed softly from hand to hand. Morning light filters softly through small windows of a village cottage. Where wood and clay are the walls, the air is cool and damp and thick with the scent of damp earth and fresh herbs harvested at dawn. The soft murmur of leaves outside is mixed with the distant call of birds waking to the day. The scent of lavender and chamomile drifts softly through the open doorway as a woman works carefully within her hands, familiar with the heft of mortar and pestle as she crushes leaves to powder her fingers, confident and patient. With the rhythm of her work, the soft ting of broken herbs falling into the bowl is almost a whisper. On the shelves in the room, bare wood holds bound stacks of roots and dehydrated blossoms. The walls are covered with clay pots filled with concoctions developed painstakingly over many months each one. Holding out the hope of relief from agony or fever or fatigue, the woman stops to inhale the acrid scent of rosemary. Before incorporating a pinch in a concoction, she stirs gradually, watching the hues combine, like a sluggish stream winding over stones. Outside, the village stirs with the slow sounds of life as the chickens softly murmur, scratching the earth, and the far-off gurgle of a stream rushes like a constant heartbeat of the earth. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth and blossoming flowers as the sun begins to warm the thatched roofs and stone walls. Villagers prepare for the day, weaving baskets, working gardens, and watching animals. All movement is slow and purposeful, as if the world itself moves to a gentle beat each household possesses. The knowledge of plants that soothe fever, ease pains, and heal wounds passed from mother to daughter, father to son, in a quiet, unspoken language of healing. The healing garden is typically no more than a strip of land along the side of the house, a small haven of green, trapped between wooden fences and stone walls, in which lavender, chamomile, and mint grow among nettles and yarrow. These plants are not chosen by accident, but because generations have learned their subtle powers. The subtle bitterness of wormwood or the cooling touch of elderflower are prescriptions written in the language of leaves, a language that teaches patience and observation. The villagers know which plants to pick in the morning dew, when their power is strongest, and how to dry them so that their healing virtues will last through the winter months, when a child's cheek burns with fever or a farmer's hand is slashed by thorn. The cure is reaped close and applied with tender care. A poultice here, a perfumed tea, there a warm compress, applied like a vow. Whispered healing is a slow rhythm that infuses the village daily life, a constant weaving of remedies into the fabric of day-to-day living, a dance of nature and human touch. Other than the plants, even common kitchen items become medicine. Honey, with its sticky sweetness, will soothe a sore throat vinegar. Mixed with herbs can disinfect a wound. And reduce pain salt from the nearest seashore acts to draw infection out, as villagers discovered through trial and time. These simple substances are cherished alongside exotic herbs, their healing value placed, not just in the plants themselves, but in the strict preparation and loving hands that apply them. So each day has its own quiet rituals of healing, a constant unfolding of remedies drawn from the earth where life and care are braided. Together in simple acts that hold deep meaning, the villagers go about their days in quiet harmony, with the natural world understanding that healing is both a gift and a responsibility that flows from the earth into the hands and hearts of those who tend it. As the sun climbs higher, villagers attend to their tasks, some gathering fresh herbs, while others compound preparations past. Down like secrets, some ascend the gentle hills to gather wildflowers, while others sit beside the fire grinding roots and bark into soft powders. The quiet world of healing is tightly integrated into the web of their daily lives, a world where nature's gift and human hope meet in unassuming harmony, and each breath and gesture carries the whisper of ancient wisdom. In the fields, the gentle sigh of wind through tall grasses carries the subtle scent of medicinal herbs. The pulse of life beats. Slow and powerful, the songs of birds blend with the distant thrum of villagers tilling the earth and tending animals. Each day is a small story of survival and nurturing, in which every wound healed and every illness soothed is a quiet victory over the fragility of life. The villagers are aware that healing is not necessarily swift or certain, but a process. Undertaken in patience and faith, they are aware that a leaf ripped off too early may lose its effectiveness, and that the timing of a remedy is as important as its ingredients. The wisdom to wait and to hear is passed from elders to children, not in shouting voices, but in softly directing hands and eyes that watch and learn. Even the humblest plants hold secrets. The creeping thyme that spreads like a soft green carpet over the stones has a scent that soothes the rust of the small blue flowers of the borage are said to pacify a troubled heart, and the stiff stalks of comfrey are carefully harvested to bind together broken bones and shattered flesh. The villagers treat these gifts of the earth with reverence, aware that each is a thread in the web of healing. As evening approaches, the village settles once more. The shadows stretch out across the fields, and the scent of herbs drying in the evening air wafts through. The subtle work of healing continues in the flickering light of the fire, where potions are stirred for the night and prayers are spoken for the ill. The village breathes together in a peaceful rhythm of hope and healing. This first glimpse into the medicinal life of medieval villagers is a portal into a world where nature and man are in a delicate harmony, in which every plant that is gathered and every remedy that is brewed carries the weight of centuries of knowledge and the gentle promise of comfort and health. As the night falls gently on the village, we carry with us the subtle strength of this ancient way of healing, a strength that lies in the rustle of leaves and the silent pulse of the earth itself. The wisdom of the village healers was never written in book or on scroll, but dwelled in secret in the hands and voices of the caretakers, who nursed the ill and cured the wounded. This wisdom was passed on slowly from generation to generation like a secret thread, woven across the fabric of daily existence, a thread spun of hushed stories, watchful listening, and long-proven patience. Men and women both learned which flowers to pick and when to pick them for strongest possible effect. Their lives were tied up with the cycles of earth and heaven. They watched the changing face of the moon and the long sweep of the seasons. As if nature herself was speaking in a soft voice, only the listening could discern, knowing that the morning dew was stronger than the midday sun, or that roots gathered as the frost went out held deepest healing strength. This considerate timing was thought to set aside the plants' healing energy, as if keeping strict attention to the rhythms of the world at large. Villagers could draw on the hidden secret blessings in earth, leaves and flowers that they cut somewhere, concocted fresh daily, and others dried out and warehoused for long winters. Honey-dipped tinctures and powder-filled jars lined rows of cupboard-lined wooden shelves in homes. These preparations were used for a wide range of common conditions, from scraping coughs and colds that were chilly to belly aches and cuts that would not heal. At the quiet hours of an infected night, a family would gather around a foaming bowl of medicinal tea, the soft aroma rising like a gentle promise to soothe fiery throats and aching minds. The passing of such lowly remedies itself, a healing ritual filled with love and hope. The warmth of the cup passed from hand to hand, a solace in itself, greater than what it contained. The villagers also turned to the land surrounding them for materials. Beyond the garden bed, the meadows and woods were full of plants and roots, whose use was learned through watching, and oral tradition gatherers would move quietly through the brambles, searching for dandelion. Greens to calm the digestion or plantain to calm skin rash. These were slow and deliberate, forays made with respect for the land that provided these gifts and a deep sense of knowing that balance needed to be achieved. Occasionally, the village physician would go further afield in search of unusual herbs or bark from very old trees said to have extraordinary healing properties. The journeys were gradual and deliberate, since the physician walked with respect and close familiarity with the earth, the gentle sound of leaves on the ground, and the gentle touch of wind through leaves was a subdued accompaniment to their quest. The tools they carried with them were nothing more than knives, baskets, and cloth, bags exquisitely woven to protect the valuable discoveries. Roots and leaves were taken with utmost care so as not to hurt the plants, so they could regenerate in the subsequent seasons. This considerate harvesting was a reflection of the healer's intense sensitivity towards the harmony between taking from nature and returning to it. The healer knew that earth was a web of life, and that healing emerged through being part of the web and not apart from it. In the village again, back home, making medicines was a conscious and deliberate process. Herbs were pounded and mixed with oils or animal fat to create salves that could be used on wounds. Decoctions simmered on low fires, extracting the curative powers of roots and bark into soothing liquids. The craft of medicine making was as important as the ingredients themselves. Slow stirring and careful measuring became meditation, each step considered with deliberation and a silent wish that it would heal. In most families, the healing space and the kitchen were one and the same. The smell of onions and garlic was combined with the earthy scent of dried herbs. The distinction between food and medicine was lost to many foods, nourished the body, and comforted conditions. Garlic was renowned not only for its taste, but also for its effectiveness against infection. Onions were prized for their heat and for their ability to comfort respiratory ailments. The villagers understood that the food they ate was directly connected to their healing and health. The villagers understood that healing is a slow process. Not all diseases were apt to respond quickly to treatment. Some cures took time before they developed their effect. The slow unveiling of well-being was accepted as a way of life. This patience was evidenced in the persistent tending of the sick, the soft wiping away of fevered brows, the comforting words uttered through the endless nights. These acts of kindness were themselves medicine. This humble world of healing was one of gentle determination and calming nurturance. It existed in the everyday acts of villagers who turned to earth and skies for comfort, their wisdom grounded firmly upon observation, tradition, and abiding belief in the gifts. The land provided. Each harvested leaf, each assembled poultice carried the weight of centuries of hope and restoration. Every day was filled with small things: medicine, the collecting of herbs, the preparation of teas and ointments, the tracking of symptoms, and the swapping of stories of what helped. What did? And this collective knowledge evolved slowly like a tree, with roots deep in the past and branches stretched out towards the future. The villagers understood that healing was not a solitary act, but a shared experience. The village itself was a healing garden. The small plots of land around houses tended not only for food, but for medicine, each plant chosen because of its use in the healing of common illness. The gentle touch of a hand trimming leaves or planting roots was an act of love and respect. The earth responded in kind with riches and healing force. In the shade of the village square, elders would sit sharing their wisdom, the names and functions of the plants in tones of quiet, as if sharing a sacred confidence, their voices weaving the past into the present. The children sat listening with eyes wide, learning the vocabulary of healing as a trust. To be carried on this oral tradition was at the center of the village medicine, an embodied tale whispered and retold with every telling growing more varied and full. As seasons shifted, the villagers adapted their remedies to accommodate body and soul's shifting needs. In spring, new green shoot of nettle and dandelion were gathered to cleanse and renew. In summer, perfumed flowers of lavender and chamomile were gathered to soothe and comfort. In autumn, barks and roots were dug up to strengthen and protect, and in winter, dried plants and stored medicine kept one warm and comforted during the long, cold, bleak days. This gathering and cure was a dance with nature, an existence in one with its rhythms. Even the small injuries were treated with care. A scraped knee from a fall was washed in cool water and then dressed with a poultice of crushed plantain. Leaves the pain relieved, not just by the cure, but by the caring touch that tended the wound. The villagers understood that healing began with kindness and compassion, the soft touch worth more than any medicine. In periods of greater sickness, the village would come together to support the ill. Families shared what little they had, and neighbors offered comfort and practical support. The communal spirit was a part of the healing process. No one was ever left to suffer alone. The comfort of a shared fire and the reassuring presence of gentle voices became a haven for weary bodies and minds. The village healer was often called upon at such times. Their knowledge deep and wide, they moved from room to room with unobtrusive confidence, their presence calming as a soft breeze. Their hands schooled in the crafting of remedies that stroked body and soul. They knew that healing was not just physical, but emotional and spiritual too. An integrated practice undertaken with humility and restraint. Throughout it, the villagers were closely in touch with the cycles of life and death. They knew that not all illness could be cured, that some wounds were deeper than the skin, that some disease was in the natural order of things. They accepted these things with quiet strength and did what they could to bring comfort where cure was not possible. Their labor was to ease pain, to maintain hope, and to make holy the fragile gift of life. The village healing rhythm, slow and unyielding day by day, a step closer to health. Each medicine a thread in the tapestry of healing throughout the lives of so many. This was a world where patience, compassion, and reverence for nature were the foundations of healing, a world where wellness was a well-trod journey, and every breath a prayer for well-being together, and every breath was a prayer for wellness. Over time, the rhythm of recovery in the village transcended a mere ritual. Beyond a habit acquired through repetition and memory, it became a way of existing, a strand that connected generations, not through books or written words, but through motion and common sense, through silent pauses when a mother applied a hot cloth to a child's forehead, or when an old man traced the grooves on a plant leaf with his fingers, knowing how to employ it without articulating the name. Evenings used to usher in a soft return to this soft information. As the nights cooled and the shadows spread over the fields, villagers would gather around their fires, not only to keep warm, but to concoct small things for the next day. There was no panic, no sense of urgency, only a quiet sense of concern and vigilance. The manner in which dried herbs were pounded by hand, or the manner in which a pot was set to simmer on the periphery of the fire, these were rituals. In themselves, each one performed with the sense that healing wasn't all about curing sometimes. It was simply about alleviating pain, about bringing comfort, about reminding someone that they were not alone in their hurt. Children were taught young to recognize the look of a plant, or the smell of a tincture. They were taught about, not in severity, but by being taken in, by seeing, by copying, by helping a grandmother stir a cooling syrup or harvest moss from the dark side of a stone. Children learned the craft of healing as they learned language or the rhythms of seasons. It was in them, and it grew with them. There were no physicians in the modern manner, no official practitioners with uniforms or titles. Instead, healing was common property, something that wove its way into all aspects of village life. The woman who spun wool also knew how to infuse valerian root to calm restlessness at night. The man who made tools could combine crushed garlic with goose fat to produce a balm for creaking joints. And the children who gathered water from the stream learned which leaves to shun and which could be chewed to ease a sore mouth. Stories were also a part of this healing world, not merely stories to entertain, but stories that bore knowledge hidden within like seeds to be nurtured around. The fire a story could be told of a lost traveler saved by some strange plant growing beneath, a gnarled oak, or of a wise woman who possessed the magic to soothe a crying baby. These stories instructed without lecturing. They provided lessons in the packaging of enchantment and assisted in solidifying the notion that nature was not simply alive, but also beneficent if one knew how to listen. Weather also played its part in this healing dance, as storms delivered moisture that penetrated bones and chests, and dry winds that could cleave the skin and stir the dust. To eyes and throats, villagers examined the heavens with purpose. They read the signs of approaching cold or heat and adjusted remedies, accordingly keeping more mullein against coughs or withholding more lard for warming ointments. Each season carried its particular afflictions, and each was treated to the same cautious attention, the same measured resistance offered by those who had seen it all before. The ways of the village were walked, not just to get somewhere, but as small pilgrimages, between healing places, from the garden to the creek, from the field's edge to the low rock wall where the moss was thickest. Each place had its own intention and meaning, and the walking between them was part of the medicine too. Movement, breath, time, these were all part of what returned the body and spirit to balance again and again. And there was a deep respect for those unseen forces that shaped life. Sickness was not always considered simply physical, but more so as perhaps the product of disharmony, by forgetting an association, by neglecting to show respect to the woods, spirits, or the ghosts of the ancestors' healing. It wasn't so much about the herbs or the salves, but about rebalancing, seeking forgiveness, offering thanks. It was about reclaiming what had been lost or left behind. And so healing was not only personal, but deeply spiritual. During some seasons of the year, the whole village would get together to prepare for what the autumn would yield. They would dry as many herbs as possible, tie them into twists, and suspend them high up in warm rafters. Where the air was dry and still during winter, they would check over their stores, reblend the potions that had been consumed, and tell one another what they had learned during spring. The first flowers would be noted with care, their blossoming like a promise that the world was once again coming to life, ready to share its gifts. And by summer, the gardens would be in flower, the bees would buzz, and the villagers would smile to behold how the plants they had tended had returned once more ready to mend. Healing came at times in unexpected ways, not from a paste or a mixture, but from the grace of someone else, from the hand held in silence, or from the song hummed. While dressing a wound, these small gestures were never taken for granted in the medieval village. S-world, they were all part of what made people complete, what provided them with strength in times of pain and joy, in times of peace and sorrow. Healing surrounded them, if one could learn to look at it. And animals were not excluded. Either they were generally considered to be part of the same vast network of concern when a cow got ill or a chicken was. Weakened villagers did not think of this as being different from human health. The herbs which treated a person treated the animals they depended upon, and in the soft bleat of a sheep or the nuzzle of a donkey was understanding and comfort. Wellness flowed in two ways from man to animal, and vice versa. And there were mystery times when a person would fall ill, and no medicine seemed to have any effect, when prayers were murmured softly and hope was tenderly clutched like a fragile shell. Sometimes they recovered, and sometimes not. But even in such moments, healing was present not as cure, but as presence, as kindness, as the refusal to turn away from suffering. The way neighbors still came to sit, or food was brought, or a song was sung softly into a dying room. This too was healing, though, not of the body, but of something less easy to pin down, And so the process continued as years passed and children came of age, and seasons came and went. The healing knowledge of the village remained unbroken, not perfect, not failure-free or lossless, but consistent and full of regard. Was a life in harmony with the earth, rhythms attuned to what was near and known, and in trust that even the smallest might have the ability to mend and console. As evening came back and the fires went out, the villagers would close their eyes with the scent of herbs still on their hands, the memory of quiet, pity in their hearts, and the tender sense that whatever the next day would bring, they were not alone. They carried within them 1,000 little ways to comfort pain, to give warmth, to hold hope. And in this, the healing never really ceased. It simply went on in the still simple elegance of their everyday life. The strangest ingredients used in medieval medicine. In this initial part of our silent walk through Segment 2, we will gradually expose the weird and unconventional world of medieval medicine, in which curing was pieced together not just with rituals and herbs, but with ingredients today considered weird or even eerie. And as we walk gingerly through the recollection of those times, we shall find that what appears strange these days was used in serious earnest and expectation. People in the Middle Ages believed in balance, being the secret to well-being, and they looked to the world about them for anything which could set that balance right. Sometimes it was a root or flower, but sometimes it was a stone, an animal, a body fluid, or an object, which now would rest in locked glass in a museum. But in their care and at their command, these strange objects were tools of healing, meant to produce comfort where there was pain. Here we will look at how some of them ended up being part of usual remedies, and how desperation and belief knowledge merged in pursuit of cure. There is an interesting kind of silence in the way stories of old remedies drop into the quietness. They are gentle stories, but spoken in whispers by midwives, by monks in monasteries, by traders in market stalls, by grandmothers in kitchens. The drugs they employed were so exotic that one is left to wonder how they first came into the possession of some individual, and still further how they came to be swallowed, applied to the skin, or shoved under pillows. Some of the oddest and most common ingredients employed were excrement of animals: cow, goat, dog, and pigeon droppings, and even goose. Dropping were used for purposes as varied as wound dressings to infection poultices. Some thought its heat and texture pulled disease out, while others added it to wine vinegar or honey to mellow its impact. While it might make the modern stomach queasy, it was frequently applied with placid caution, and without compunction in areas where other ingredients were not available. The belief was not only in the substance itself, but in the rhythm of preparation and repetition. In the corners of monasteries, monks kept books on the virtues of lizard fat and fox lungs. They ground burnt hedgehog hide into fever-reducing powders and mixed toad ashes in wine to cure plague symptoms. Powdered snake flesh at times, soaked in milk or mixed with myrrh, was considered to have virtues against internal sickness or bad humors. It was believed that animals that resided in the wild had secret strengths, and those strengths would be able to penetrate through the body into the patient, if constructed appropriately. Stones also were valued not only for appearance, but also for medicinal purposes. Pearls crushed with lemon juice were utilized to aid digestion and calm the nerves. Amber ground into a dust was employed in cold and sore throat teas. Unicorn horn, that was sometimes simply narwhal tusk or some other foreign material, commanded outrageous sums and was believed to neutralize poisons or repel disease if shaved into water. Even coral was not just an adornment, but believed to soothe the blood and keep children from nightmares. Human body secretions were also part of the cure on some occasions, though the idea would be repugnant today. Earwax was used to cure cold sores and chapped lips urine, especially that from a virgin girl or boy, was believed to be cleansing and was employed in dressing wounds or in diagnosis. Sweat extracted from a healthy body was bottled and used on occasion to fight off chills in the sick. It was not considered strange in the way we might see it now, but rather as an expansion of the body as own natural capacity to heal itself. Passed along graciously one to another, blood ran its course, but not necessarily as we perceive. The blood of beasts, especially from newly killed animals, was considered full of heat and life. A blood-stained cloth could be laid upon a weak chest or bandaged around joints wrung with cold. In a few cases, even powdered human bone procured from graveyards was utilized as effective against epilepsy or nightmares. This was medical cannibalism, and though not widespread, it persisted in some quarters, especially among those who believed in soul and strength transference. Odd as it seems, it was done in whispers, in faith, not fear. The kitchen was not separated from the apothecary in these days, and some of the most bizarre ingredients ran through both without much separation. Mold scraped off moldy bread or the cellar walls was sometimes gathered up for its claimed healing rot. Rotting apples and vinegar-drenched old flesh were used to draw out infection or reduce hardened flesh. Even cobwebs were gathered carefully and packed into wounds to stop bleeding in the hope that the sticky web contained some kind of mild knowledge. The border between the divine and the scientific was blurry and indistinct. Prayers were read not merely over holy relics, but even over vases full of earthworms and basins full of ground beetles. There were potions which involved the heart of a young hare being combined with wine or the rat's tail and oil. The stranger the ingredient, the greater was the revered faith bestowed on it, especially when all other options had been attempted and faltered. That was not a cruel world, nor a careless one, but wonder, desperation, and the primal need to make someone whole. Behind every strange cure, there was an individual praying quietly for ease or for healing of someone they loved. They gathered these things with reverence, not as witches or fools, but as individuals trying to navigate a world full of anguish and unknowns. And thus here we find ourselves in the midst of a tapestry woven of beasts, dung, gems, and herbs, where the value of one leaf was equal to the dog's skull, and where a mother might offer her single pearl or last dried frog in order to keep a child from fever. And so we rest lightly at the end of this initial part, having with us the start of realization that there was oddness in healing that wasn't imperfections, but characteristics of their era. In the pages that follow, we shall continue on this path to meet more of these bizarre companions of medieval medicine and discover how they were compiled ready and used in forms that touched the everyday world, where the bizarre was a species of hope and the unexplained the instrument of survival. The use of animal-derived substances was well established in medieval medicine's therapeutic arsenal. The village healer would administer powdered staghorn ground into a fine powder and mixed with warm wine to calm nervous tremors or ward off seizures. Others sought a remedy in bezoar stones removed from the stomachs of goats or deer that were believed to draw poison from the blood when hung in water or ground into a potion. The fascination with these stones was as much magical as medical, their rarity giving them a regard not dissimilar to relics. Frogs were sometimes kept in a jar of wine or vinegar in cottages and kitchens, and the liquid used to dress infected wounds or rashes. It was thought that the essence of the frog, which had passed into the liquid, had the power to restore the balance of the humors within the body. Earthworms were also used, boiled in wine or pounded into a poultice to dress joint pain or bruises. These uses seem strange to us now, but to medieval individuals, they were filled with inherited wisdom and trial through experience. The frog's cold, damp nature was the perfect antidote to excessive heat in the body. The worm, living underground, was a form of secret knowledge and connection to the healing powers of the earth. Bats, although feared for their nocturnal flight, were believed to have medicinal essence, especially for the curing of blindness. The wings were dried and powdered and applied around the eyes or compounded in ointments. The darkness of their lives was believed to harbor a specific knowledge of the ailments of vision. In coastal towns, dried seahorses or powdered crab shells were part of herbal remedies. These sea creatures regularly turned into symbols of transformation, believed to draw out illness through their magical connection with the tides and the phases of the moon. In the forest, monks and herbalists would search out creatures not just for body parts, but for their meaning. The molted skin of a serpent might be burned, and the ashes mixed with oil to create a salve believed cure scaly skin diseases or repel curses. Snakes held a particular place in the medieval mind, both feared and revered for their connection to transformation and healing. Even hedgehog spines burned to ashes were among the ingredients in tooth powders that were believed to strengthen the gums and purify the mouth. The use of these kinds of ingredients was not limited to animal parts. Human-derived ingredients also had their own role to play in healing lore. Most prized was mummy powder, which consisted of ground-up bits of embalmed bodies imported from Egypt. Taken mixed with wine or sprinkled on bread, it was thought to confer energy and stave off illness. It combined the mystique of the ancient world with the macabre appeal of the medieval psyche. Human fat procured during certain types of burial or from corpses on battlefields was even used in ointments believed to soothe nerve pain or cure inflamed joints. As unsettling as such practices are today, they were incorporated within the moral culture of their time as a means of recouping life from death. Midwives and healers would collect placental material, or even the umbilical cords, and dry them to powder or steep them in oil, to create tinctures for fertility or to safeguard against miscarriage. The intensely symbolic nature of birth and its products gave them a strong position in healing practices. These were acts of respect as well as practicality, acknowledgement of the sacred nature of life as beginning. Urine was also a popular ingredient, prized for its diagnostic and curative qualities. Physicians would examine its color, odor, and texture to determine the balance of the four humors in the patient. It was even utilized to wash wounds, as its sterility when freshly passed was believed to prevent infection. In more advanced treatments, it was sometimes boiled with herbs and applied as compresses, or even ingested in carefully measured doses. The urine of children who were healthy was considered especially pure and was collected for these more refined purposes. Manure was also of medicinal value, dried and finely mixed with other substances. It could be used in poultices to draw out infection or warm the extremities of the body. However, repulsive by modern standards, such applications were built upon theories of sympathetic magic and humoral balance. The reasoning was less the ingredient itself, but rather its place in a broader symbolic and bodily system. The same went for ashes of burnt hair or nail clippings, which were put in protective amulets or ground into salves intended to pin the soul back into the body following shock. In monasteries and learned houses, the use of these ingredients was itself recorded in manuscripts alongside more traditional herbs. Frogs, bats, and snakes were drawn in the margins alongside careful Latin descriptions. These texts unveil to us not only what was used, but how seriously these ingredients were consumed. Each entry was a whisper from the past, a guarded memory maintained by candlelight and shared from healer to healer. The strangeness of these ingredients was not only in their materiality, but in the thick symbolic meanings they carried, and the deep belief that healing was a dialogue between the body and the wider world. Among the strange ingredients used in medieval healing, possibly none was more mysterious than the mandrake. Its root assumed the human form, and its uprooting was attended by ritual and fear. It was believed to shriek while being pulled out of the earth and kill everyone who heard it. It was thus pulled out by such dogs while the collector fled. When obtained, it was wrapped in silk and cleansed in wine and milk before use. It was said to cure barrenness, induce sleep, and provide visions. Even its mere presence in the home was said to keep evil at bay. This heavy overlay of magic and medicine shows how healing was never merely physical, but spiritual and emotional as well. The more unusual the ingredient, the more powerful it was believed to be. Uncommon substances held power because they existed outside the ordinary, drawing attention to the enigma of the body's sickness and its healing. Each ingredient carried a history, a genealogy, and a set of beliefs that made it resonate within the medieval mind. The effectiveness of a remedy was not gauged solely by its physical effect, but by the sense of order and reassurance it brought to the patient. Healing in this sense was as much a repair of the spirit as of the body. To modern eyes, the recipes of medieval healers will frequently seem absurd, grotesque, or irrational, but within their own context, they formed a complete and internally consistent system. They reflected the values of their time, the despair in the face of affliction, and the ingenuity required to interpret a world full of mystery. These ingredients are embedded with the fingerprints of a people struggling to come to terms with their world through every resource available to them. Their medicine was not a list of strange objects, but a rich cultural weave of observation, belief, and experience. The use of animal remedies in medieval medicine possessed a kind of ritualistic value that kept the cure at arm's length from superstition. Between pious practice and devout folklore in towns and villages throughout Europe, beasts of the field would, and even distant lands, found their way into the medicine chest, not for their flesh, but for the intangible virtues ascribed to their bones, blood, organs. And even dung it is, here among these lost accounts, that the fascinating function of the toad reemerges once more. Dried toad powder found its use in various tinctures. Intended to repel fevers, or to shatter mysterious maladies, its body charred, then pulverized and added to wines or broths, was said to impart the toad's own immunity to disease into the drinker, no doubt. The smell alone required a stout constitution, but the belief was held by villagers and traveling healers as well. Just as strange and maybe even more unsettling was the extensive application of animal waste, not just as fertilizer for crops, but as a forceful drug in the apothecary. S-craft pigeon droppings were collected fresh and utilized in poultices for infections. Goat dung with vinegar added was put on wounds in hopes it would draw out poisons. Sheep dung was heated and applied to aching joints, particularly in the winter, when rheumatism was most prevalent to our modern sensibilities. This is unthinkable. But to the medieval medic, the thinking was not one of sanitation, but of balance. The heat of rotting was thought to neutralize the cold of certain sicknesses, much like fire might heat a cooled limb, and these habits lingered on because sometimes inadvertently they did work, if only partially. Another disturbing but common belief was in the healing potential of human hearts, not whole bodies, but parts, hair, nails, bone, or fat obtained from dead people, frequently from executed felons. Fat removed from the body was used to make salves for nerve pain and bruising, especially among people with the means to purchase. The cervix skull parts were ground into powders for epilepsy and seizure, a practice based on the idea that the power of the dead would flow into the victim. It was not unheard of for body parts to be surreptitiously removed from gallows fields or cemeteries, often under cover of darkness. Such ingredients were stored out of sight in linen packages or clay vessels, and retailed openly by people who moved along the fringes of religion and legality. In monasteries and noble houses, as well, other foreign material made its way into the healing arts, just as often through rumor and commerce. Mummy powder imported from Egypt, or so at least the claim went, became a widely used exotic medicine ground and marketed in black flasks. It was prescribed for internal hemorrhaging, coughing illness, and even as a general tonic to revive vigor. The idea was that the old spices of embalmment stopped not only the body, but an eternal energy that was revitalized in those who ingested it. And thus these powders sold for high prices and were often hawked under flickering torchlight in back rooms of abbeys and apothecaries alike. Even gemstones were not spared the medicinal fantasy. Amber pearls and ground emeralds were swallowed in infinitesimal quantities, frequently combined with wine, to treat heart ailments, stomach ailments, or melancholy illnesses. The logic here was not merely symbolic, the idea that beauty and eternity would heal the fragile and ephemeral, but also alchemical to those who believed the stuff of the world could be transformed, as the sick could be made healthy. Gold especially was prized, a small amount of it in liquid form, thought to restore balance and divine favor. The process known as aurum potable, or drinkable gold, was reserved for the wealthy, but remained trendy at court over the centuries. But no food perhaps better indicates the strangeness of slaughterhouse medicine than bezoars. These were infrequent chunks of hardened concretions found in the stomachs of animals, most particularly goats, which were believed to have phenomenal cleansing properties. It was believed that if slaughterhouse medicine put inside a poisoned beverage, would immediately soak up the poison and neutralize it. Some nobles wore them as pendants near the heart, their presence a tacit insurance against assassination. Such stones became so prized that they were traded back and forth between kings and stored in treasure rooms alongside sapphires and relics. The line between ingredient and magic was often confused for the healer, not so much the material, but the treatment spoken over, stored, and administered. Rituals such as boiling at a precise hour, using with the left hand, or praying in treatment, all added hues of power, medical, but also spiritual, because in the medieval era, illness was rarely seen as a material condition. It was moral, social, and even cosmic, a disruption of harmony, and the cure could be just as complex, requiring a mixture of material cure and metaphysical intervention. There were cures that required silence to ready speaking during the process being undertaken. Was thought to break the potency of the cure. Some poultices were placed on the body with a request for the patient to be quiet until morning. Others had steps backward while collecting ingredients or spinning 3 times. Prior to grinding the herbs, such things were not quirks, but acquired knowledge passed down like a precious thread, uniting generations of caregivers to a shared unseen realm. And for every documented use of these peculiar ingredients, there were 100 more never put on paper, never documented, except in the quiet memory of herbal women, hedge witches, monks, and traveling leechcraft men who carried these secrets in whispers from village to village. Some used earthworms for fever, spiderwebs to stop wounds, frog spawn boiled to cure skin, ailments, snail shells powdered for toothache, eel fat rubbed into aching backs. No substance was too common if it showed even the slightest glimmer of healing power. In that kind of world, pain was a constant shadow, and hope not in perfection, but in persistence. The need to try to mix, to chant, to weight each remedy, however bizarre, an act of defiance against sickness, a belief that somehow within the body, or in the earth some way, might get balance and heal. And even if the cure did not work, the act itself had value for it, testified that you are not alone in your sickness, and that someone still has faith in you being made whole. As we close this chapter, the image that lingers before us is not so much of bizarre concoctions, but of a culture stretching with what it had towards healing in a hostile world. A culture that bent over bubbling cauldrons cracked open, the shells of animals sifted ashes from ancient fires, and scrounged in dirt, in herbs, and in the stars, for something that could assuage, for something that might just keep the shadows at bay. A little while longer, it was odd, yes, sometimes even pernicious, but also keenly human, and in its very own right, quietly valiant. How magic and prayer were part of healing. Healing in medieval villages was not just about herbs or strange ingredients collected from swamps, forests, or animal parts. It was also deeply tied to forces that villagers could not see, forces they felt all around them. From birth to death, this segment explores the role of magic and prayer in medieval healing, and how villagers turned to blessings, charms, and rituals just as much as they turned to broths, ointments, and poultices. When the body was sick, the spirit was often treated too, and that spirit was believed to be shaped by more than the physical world. There was no separation between the earthly and the divine in the minds of villagers, and illness often seemed like a sign, a punishment, or even an attack from invisible beings. A fever might come after angering a saint. A skin rash might be blamed on a wandering curse. Villagers believed deeply that health was something held in the balance between good and evil, between light and shadow, and this belief made them turn to magical protections, holy relics, whispered prayers, and protective rituals in times of sickness. In a world where science had not yet taken form as we know it, now people filled the unknown with faith, with fear, and with rituals passed down from elders and healers. Each ailment carried with it not just a physical toll, but a spiritual weight that had to be lifted through practices that were both sacred and superstitious. The healer might know the plants in the hedgerow, but she also knew the words to speak when a baby cried endlessly in the night, or when a man had visions after a wound. When a villager became ill, and no herb or mixture seemed to bring relief, that was when magic was called upon. It was not the kind of magic with wands or spells from storybooks, but something quieter and older. It was in the signs traced on doors, in the way water was drawn at midnight from a stream. It was in the hidden symbols carved into wooden spoons, or the small bone tokens sewn into a sick child pillow. One such practice was the making of a healing charm. A charm could be something as simple as a piece of string tied in 3 knots each, not made while whispering the name of a saint or reciting a line from scripture. These strings might then be worn around the wrist or placed under the bedding of the ill. If the person recovered, the charm was kept safe. If they died, it might be buried with them or burned to release whatever force had failed to protect them another. Charm involved sacred objects, often collected from the local church or monastery. A flake of wax from the Easter candle, a thread from the priest robe, a scrap of paper upon which holy words were written. These items were thought to carry the power of God and were hidden in places near the sick body, in shoes under pillows tied to bedposts. Prayers, too, were not just uttered in churches, but mumbled under breaths in the fields, in kitchens beside the hearth, or while kneeling in doorways. There were prayers for fevers, for broken bones, for madness, for childbirth, for plagued villagers. Believed certain saints had special powers. Saint Sebastian was called upon to protect against pestilence, Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Dymphna for madness. It was said that calling their names while holding a piece of bread or lighting a candle could open a path to healing that no herb could offer. There was also the rite of passing illness on a quiet ritual that involved transferring sickness into another object. This could be done with an egg placed gently on the chest of the sick person, then carried far from the home and left at a crossroads. Some healers used water, speaking words over it, and then having the ill person drink it in a single breath. This water might also be poured into the roots of a tree, thought to absorb the pain and cleanse the soul. Healing prayers sometimes became songs passed from mother to daughter, whispered into the ears of newborns, or spoken aloud when a family member fell into delirium. They were old words, often without clear meaning, passed down from times long before Latin or even the earliest village tongue. These songs did not rhyme, but had rhythm, a heartbeat of hope, in syllables worn smooth by repetition. In some regions, particularly where the church had less direct control, villagers turned to figures known as cunning folk. These were not priests or physicians, but people known to walk between the visible and invisible world. They knew which days to plant and which days to heal. They read the skies and the smoke, and could name the unseen thing that brought suffering. Cunning folk might mark a threshold with ashes, or place a broom upside down behind a door to trap bad spirits. They could speak the name of a curse and undo it with words drawn in dirt or by burying a coin at dawn. Certain places were believed to hold healing magic of their own, like sacred springs. These were pools or small flowing waters, where people left offerings from cloth tied to branches, above to coins or food left on stones beside the bank. Women with fertility struggles might visit such a spring to drink or wash and leave behind tokens of their hopes. The water itself was thought to hold ancient memory, to remember all who had come, and to help those whose faith was pure. Another important part of healing through prayer and magic was timing. Villagers believed certain times of day held more power: the first light of morning, the final star before dawn, the midnight hour. When the world was between sleep and wake, these in-between moments were when prayers were strongest, when doors between realms opened. If only a little, healers often worked in silence during these hours, believing the quiet helped the words find their way through the veil. It was not only individuals who sought magical healing. Whole communities did too. When sickness swept through a village, a procession might be held. Candles would be carried through every lane, chanting would fill the air, holy water would be sprinkled on doors, and fires would be lit. Crossroads in the hope of driving away the pestilence. People would walk barefoot, with ash on their heads, hoping the act of shared prayer and pain might bring relief. There were rituals that involved food as well. Sometimes bread would be blessed and crumbled into the stew of the sick. Sometimes salt would be passed over a candle 3 times before being sprinkled into water offered to the fevered. There were even healing circles formed by elders where each person would speak the name of the ill and offer a word of power, not a medical word, but a word of hope words, like return, breathe, rise, stay. In homes where death hovered near the threshold, it was common to hear chants. These were not always religious chants, but rhythmic repetitions of ancient words, sometimes with no known origin. These sounds were believed to soothe the soul, to anchor it inside the body, and to keep away the grasp of dark spirits. Sometimes they were performed by a group of women sitting in a circle, with their eyes closed, holding hands and swaying with each whispered phrase. Objects carried healing weight too. A child might wear a necklace made from teeth feathers or beads, arranged in a pattern passed down through generations. These were not ornaments, but protections. Each piece carried a story, maybe from a battle, maybe from a birth, or an old healing long forgotten by most, but remembered in the bead's color or shape. Stories also played their role in this kind of healing. Healers might tell tales of those who had overcome sickness not as comfort, but as magic itself. A tale well told could shape belief, and belief was a power equal to any potion. A mother would tell her son about a boy who touched the stone behind the church and woke free of fever. A daughter would hear of a grandmother who lit a candle before dawn and never fell ill again. These were not just stories, they were woven spells carried in voice and memory. So the healing of the medieval villager was not made only of herbs or powders, but of whispered hopes, of shared faith, and of unseen forces believed to be just beyond the world of the eye. Their medicine lived in the crack between night and day, in the silence before the first rooster, in the flicker of candlelight on the kitchen wall. It was both simple and mysterious, grounded in the earth, yet forever reaching toward the unknown. The everyday practices of healing in medieval villages were deeply entwined with a belief system that saw illness not just as a physical condition, but as something shaped by unseen forces. The notion of sin, spiritual imbalance, and cosmic disharmony lingered in every cough and fever. While herbs and potions were used, people seldom believed they were sufficient on their own. Healing needed favor from forces beyond comprehension. And so magic and prayer became not just additions to medicine, but vital instruments in the healing process itself. Many healing rituals began not with a physical treatment, but with spoken words. The spoken word, after all, held deep power in medieval minds. Words could summon spirits, call upon saints, banish devils, or soothe troubled souls. In villages, a healer might whisper a charm over a wound, not merely for comfort, but because it was believed the incantation itself could physically drive away the sickness. These charms often borrowed language from scripture, but twisted it subtly, adding elements from local folklore or the healer's own traditions. For example, one common healing charm was used to treat fevers or shakes. The healer would face the patient, place their hand gently on the forehead, and say a quiet phrase like, "Fever, fly from this flesh." As Christ walked from the tomb, as the sun lifts dew from the fields. These phrases were passed down through generations, kept alive not in books, but in memory. The healer might not fully understand Latin or theology, but the rhythm, cadence, and sacred echoes of the words were believed to hold the same strength as a relic or blessing. Some of the most fascinating rituals involved writing protective symbols or sacred names on parchment or cloth. These talismans might be pinned inside clothing or tied around a wrist. In some villages, It was common to find someone wearing a strip of fabric stitched with the names of the three kings Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, as these were thought to protect against sickness, especially when worn during outbreaks. The belief was that these names carried celestial protection, and when paired with a prayer or blessing, their power multiplied. Holy water was also used liberally. Collected from the church's font, or blessed by a priest, it was sprinkled across beds, doorways, or over the patient's body. It wasn't seen merely as symbolic, but as having tangible, cleansing properties. Some healers even recommended mixing a few drops into herbal remedies, especially when treating those thought to be touched by evil spirits. In regions where superstition ran high, illness was sometimes seen not just as misfortune, but as a kind of possession or curse. And so, healing needed to involve not just herbs and poultices, but purification, expulsion, and divine defense. Saints played an enormous role in healing. Villagers turned to particular saints depending on the nature of the ailment. Saint Apollonia was called upon for toothaches, Saint Blaise for throat troubles, Saint Nymphe for madness. People often wore medallions with the saints' images or placed candles before their statues. In some homes, a small corner would be set aside with a wooden image or painted board depicting the saint, where offerings like bread, flowers, or coins were laid. These were personal acts of devotion, but also desperate calls for divine intervention. One deeply respected ritual involved pilgrimages. When ordinary healing failed, families might bring a sick relative to a nearby shrine. In England, the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury was particularly famous, where thousands came each year hoping for miracles. These journeys were long, sometimes dangerous, but they were seen as acts of faith and a test of worthiness. People believed that a pilgrimage itself might please the heavens enough to lift a sickness. And even if healing did not come, the effort was considered sacred. In more rural communities, without access to major shrines, miniature pilgrimages were improvised. A person might walk barefoot around the village church 7 times, or lie overnight before the altar wrapped in linen. These rituals blurred the line between spiritual dedication and folk tradition. Sometimes, a coin was placed on the tongue of the sick in offering to St. Peter, gatekeeper of heaven, while a prayer was spoken for safe passage from illness, or if death was near, from pain into the afterlife. The use of relics was also surprisingly widespread. Pieces of bone, cloth, or wood said to have come from saints or the Holy Land were considered potent. Even in small villages, traveling monks or sellers would arrive claiming to carry genuine relics. Whether real or not, these relics were believed to radiate spiritual energy. Holding one during prayer or placing it under a pillow was thought to help the body heal. There are stories of relics being pressed to wounds or hung above bedsides. Sometimes, drops of oil from a lamp that burned near a relic were collected and added to salves or ointments. It wasn't always peaceful or calm. When illnesses grew worse, desperation led to more dramatic rituals. A healer might gather the family and lead a chant while circling the bed. They might place protective symbols drawn in chalk on the floor or hang herbs and crosses above the doorways. These rituals drew from Christianity, but also from older pagan customs that still lingered in the countryside. The result was a blend of sacred and ancient, belief and ritual, fear and hope. Another fascinating practice was the use of confession as a healing tool. Illness, many believed, was the result of unspoken sins. A person burdened by guilt or secrecy might become physically ill. So confessing not just to a priest, but sometimes to a healer or elder, was thought to release that weight. The spoken word again had power. The act of admitting, weeping, asking forgiveness could be healing in itself. Afterward, the healer might wash the patient's hands in holy water, burn a sprig of rosemary to cleanse the air, or offer a cup of calming tea. In other cases, the illness was thought to be caused by curses or evil eyes. This was especially feared among mothers of sick children. They believed jealous neighbors or passing strangers might cast harm through a glance or a muttered word. In these cases, prayers alone were not enough. A healer might use counter curses, short rhyming phrases, herbs burnt in threes, a whispered plea to the Virgin Mary. Sometimes a black chicken was passed 3 times over the child's head and then let go outside the village, taking the curse with it. These methods might seem unusual today, but they were deeply rooted in a view of the world where unseen forces, good and bad, were everywhere. What stands out most is that healing was not just a physical pursuit, but a deeply emotional one. It offered comfort to the soul, structure to the unknown, and hope in the face of fear. Whether one was drinking an herb tea or whispering a prayer to Saint Raphael, the process of healing was never isolated from the realm of belief. And even when medicine failed, the rituals, the charms, the prayers, they gave meaning to suffering and dignity to those facing it. Inside the walls of the village church, people gathered each week, not only to hear the voice of the priest, but also to seek relief from pain and sickness. For in these small stone sanctuaries, healing was often asked from forces unseen and unknowable, long before a wound was washed with water or covered with herbs. The first step was to whisper a prayer into the dark or light, a small candle on the worn wooden altar, hoping the smoke would rise to places higher than their troubles could reach. One of the most common prayers was to Saint Sebastian, believed to protect against plague. His image was painted on walls, and carved into walking staff's arrows pierced his body in every scene, reminding people that he had survived pain and might help them survive too. People would kneel before his likeness and say the same words day after day, not just for themselves, but for their children, their animals, their neighbors, even their enemies, because illness was a village problem, not just a private one, and healing needed everyone's hope to work. In homes where illness lingered, charms were tied above the door to keep evil spirits away. These charms were simple sometimes, just a scrap of parchment with sacred words written in Latin that no one understood, or a twig taken from a tree struck by lightning, believed to carry the power of the heavens. Sometimes a priest was called to sprinkle holy water around the home, walking from corner to corner while villagers followed with heads bowed, eyes closed, murmuring prayers through lips that trembled with worry. Magic in these villages did not always mean great rituals or fiery displays. It was often quiet, careful, and filled with intention. A woman might sew a tiny stone into the hem of her husband's shirt to protect him from fevers and chills. This stone was chosen, not for its color or shine, but because it had lain in a stream behind the chapel during the first frost of the year, making it sacred by timing, not by appearance. Such acts were a common part of daily life, small choices made with great belief. The line between prayer and magic was so thin that most did not see it and did not need to. They used both freely without asking which was real and which was superstition. Healing prayers were copied into books passed down from mother to daughter, kept in baskets with herbs and bits of wool and beads made of bone. These books were read during sickness and sometimes when no one was ill at all, just to keep the memory of protection alive, just to keep fear at bay. One such book described a ritual done at dawn. When a child had a persistent cough, the healer would place a piece of bread under the pillow, then take the child to the edge of the forest, where she whispered words into a knot of wood, and she fed the bread to a stray dog. Saying the illness had now been given away, the forest, the dog, the healer all became part of the cure. Whether the cough stopped or not, no one ever forgot the ceremony, because it gave them something to hold on to when everything else felt unsure. Certain words were believed to hold power not because of their meaning, but because of how they sounded. Some syllables were thought to shake loose evil, while others called in protection words. Like abracadabra, were not tricks. They were ancient tools drawn from older languages used by wise folk who remembered times before the church, before the plague, before any doctor ever wrote a recipe on clean paper. These words were whispered into water, which was then used to wash the face or sprinkled across the floor to clean more than just dust. Prayer also included movement. People knelt, stood, and crossed themselves in patterns that matched the rhythm of the seasons, each gesture marking time and faith together. When someone was very ill, the priest might circle their bed 3 times, reading from the gospel, each turn meant to confuse or chase away whatever dark thing had attached itself to the person lying there. Sometimes it worked, and the fever broke, and sometimes it did not. And even then the pattern itself gave comfort. It told the family that nothing more could be done, and that was something to hold in their hearts. Old stories said that certain illnesses were caused by curses, and to remove them, one must speak the curse backwards. This practice required memory and silence and a very still night. Many healers would not attempt it unless they were sure no birds were calling and no wind moved the grass, because any noise might disrupt the reversal. This kind of healing felt more like untying a knot than fighting an enemy, and it was done with as much care as spinning thread or repairing torn cloth, each word undone in the same order it had first been spoken. The sick often wore amulets made of bones, feathers, or carved wood. These were not decorations. They were shields. One woman, known in her village for curing stomach pains, wore a necklace made of tiny animal teeth, each one from a different creature found during a particular moon phase. Villagers believed her necklace held the power of the animals and the night sky combined. When she placed her hands on someone's belly and muttered prayers, the pain sometimes left and did not return, and no one ever asked why. People also believed in healing dreams. To sleep in a sacred space like the church or a shrine was to invite a vision of a saint or angel who might reveal a cure or instruction in the night. These dreams were written down even when they made no sense. A dream about a crow eating berries might lead someone to try a new mixture of plants or visit a healer in the next village. Stories of these dreams spread quickly, and even if the cure was strange, people were willing to try because no idea was too odd when illness stayed too long. So prayer was not just words said aloud, it was written into the paths. People walked drawn into the dust with fingertips woven into the patterns of their blankets. Spoken in the hush between cries and laughter, it was part of medicine, not beside it, and no one doubted its place. It was as real as the fever and as powerful as the herbs, and sometimes even more lasting in this way. Magic and prayer wrapped themselves around the wounds of the villagers, sometimes gently, sometimes desperately, but always with a belief that something greater could help if they reached for it the right way, in the right moment, with the right heart. The use of magic and prayer in healing did not stay limited to the hands of the clergy or the wise women who whispered ancient chants under the moonlight. It was something woven into the very threads of daily life, something that existed between the folds of every gesture, every hope, and every remedy. It was more than belief. It was a force that shaped behavior, gave meaning to suffering, and promised solace when nothing else could. The homes of medieval villagers were filled with little signs of this invisible medicine. Charms made of dried herbs were tied to door frames, feathers hung above beds, and carved wooden tokens rested beneath pillows, all placed there with the intention to ward off illness or encourage recovery. The placement of these items followed no single pattern, but often passed from generation to generation as tradition whispered through time and held firm in the face of hardship. Prayer was not always grand or loud. It did not always echo in churches. Sometimes it was silent, spoken beneath breath in a darkened room, or in a field where a child lay pale and shivering. A mother would press her lips to the child's forehead and murmur words of protection, perhaps a verse from the Bible or something older, something forgotten by books but remembered by the heart. This was how villagers tried to bring balance between the body and spirit. Holy relics were often believed to hold great healing powers. These relics, which might be bones of a saint, a splinter of wood from a sacred object, or a piece of cloth once worn by a holy figure, were kept safe in churches, monasteries, and sometimes even private homes. People would travel long distances just to touch them or to be near them in the hope that their ailments would ease or disappear. Altogether, relics brought comfort because they were thought to be physical links to the divine. Monks and nuns often played a special role in this part of healing. Their prayers were seen as especially powerful, and their hands were believed to be guided by something higher within the walls of monasteries. They would mix herbs, write blessings, and speak gentle words over the sick. They documented illnesses and cures, but also recorded visions, dreams, and signs that seemed to come from beyond the world of flesh and bone. Their records show us how closely faith and care were intertwined. In villages, there were specific rituals designed to cure or protect someone from a known illness. A person might walk around a church 3 times while reciting a certain prayer. They might collect water from a spring known for its purity and bless it. Before giving it to the sick, some rituals involved passing a child through the roots of a split tree, which was believed to take away disease and return strength. These actions were done not out of ignorance, but out of a deep belief in the power of the unseen. Astrology was also used in this magical healing. A healer might consult the stars. Before beginning treatment, the position of the moon and planets were believed to affect the body and its humors. If the stars were not favorable, the healer might delay a treatment or change a prescription in hopes of better results. Later, many believed that the heavens mirrored the human body, and that by understanding the skies, one could better understand the illness at hand. Witches were feared, but also respected. Many villagers believed in their powers, both for harm and for help in times of great sickness when common remedies failed. Someone might secretly visit a woman known for her spells, her brews, and her whispered words. She might light a candle, let the smoke drift in circles above the patient's head, and chant phrases passed down from generations. Unknown, sometimes it worked, or at least comforted, and that comfort was often half the cure. Pilgrimages were another path of healing. People would travel sometimes for days or weeks to reach holy sites believed to offer cures for specific diseases at these places. They would pray, kneel in candlelight, bathe in sacred water, or touch relics brought out by monks. Such journeys were acts of devotion, but also acts of desperation in a time when pain was frequent and answers were few. The journey itself became part of the healing. It gave people hope and purpose. Healing was also connected with sound bells, or rung to chase away illness, their vibrations believed to purify the air and chase away evil spirits. Certain chants were thought to carry power not just for prayer, but for restoration of health. The repetition of words in rhythm, in tone, in rising and falling voice seemed to open a space in which healing could take place. Monks would sing in long corridors, their voices echoing off stone as people listened and felt something shift within. Dreams were watched carefully for signs of healing or warning. A dream of clear water might mean recovery, while a dream of shadow might mean worsening health. Villagers would tell each other their dreams, and sometimes a healer would interpret them, offering advice or ritual based on the meaning behind the images. In this way, sleep became a place of diagnosis, and the mind a place of visions that could guide the body toward wellness. Nature itself was full of signs: animals, birds, the shape of clouds, the way a branch bent in the wind. All these were read like texts by those who believed that the world spoke in symbols. If a crow landed near a house, it might be seen as a sign to begin prayer or to light a candle in a window. Some watched the behavior of bees or the flight of swallows before deciding what remedy to use. Every movement was a message, every shadow a clue. Not all practices were gentle. Sometimes fear brought out rituals of pain to drive illness away. Some believed that beating the bed with a branch might scare away the spirit of sickness, or that fasting for days might purify the body enough for healing to take place. Children were made to swallow bitter roots, not only for their medical properties, but also to show devotion and willingness to be healed. Suffering itself was seen as a path toward grace, and many bore it with silent prayer. The use of words written on parchment or scratched into wood carried magical force. These charms were often hidden beneath floors, sewn into clothes, or slipped beneath mattresses. They might carry phrases in Latin or other older Language is believed to be sacred or powerful. The mere act of writing the words gave them life, and placing them near the sick was thought to anchor healing energy in the space. Village gatherings sometimes included healing circles, where people would sit together around a fire and share stories, songs, prayers, and remedies. It was not only a way to spread knowledge, but a way to create a shared strength, the belief that healing could be found in community, and that no one needed to face illness alone. Each voice added to the rhythm of hope, each gesture adding warmth to the cold unknown of disease. In the quiet of the forest, some healers would leave offerings to the spirits, believed to guard certain herbs or springs. They might leave bread, milk, or a shiny pebble beside a stone thought to mark sacred ground in exchange for health or guidance. This type of interaction showed how deeply villagers respected the unseen, and how healing was as much about relationship as it was about remedy. So the last part of this segment is not an ending, but a resting place, a point where the body, mind, and spirit could pause in the long, quiet journey of healing. And so the flickering lights of faith begin to settle across the village as evening draws near. The last chants echo low from a chapel, where a woman prays not for herself, but for her child, wrapped in blankets of wool and straw. The healer with wrinkled hands places a carved charm near the child and sprinkles herbs around the bed in slow practiced circles. Beside her, the local priest watches in silence, not in disapproval, but in understanding, for he too knows that sometimes healing requires both hands and hope. Outside, the sun fades behind trees, the sky turning soft and gray, like old cloth, and the village holds its breath, waiting for the fever to break, waiting for the spirits to pass by, waiting for the gentle breath of dawn. In homes across the fields, people whisper charms hung on doorways. They tie twine around wrists. They light candles beside bowls of garlic or onion or lavender, and they listen to the night. For in this world, healing is not one thing. It is prayer and potion. It is touch and belief. It is the blessing of the wind across the hill and the warmth of a familiar hand on a tired brow. And so they wait together beneath wooden beams and thatch roofs, beneath stars that never forget their names, waiting and hoping, trusting that what they have always done, what their mothers and their mothers before them once did, will be enough to carry them through one more night. And maybe, just maybe, the morning will bring health, or at least peace, and that is sometimes all that healing can promise. The village healers who knew all the secrets. In every small medieval village tucked between fields and forests, there lived one person who was always known by everyone, not because they owned land or because they had noble titles, but because they knew how to ease pain, how to treat illness, and how to calm both the body and the soul. They were the healers, the quiet figures who held knowledge passed down not in books, but in whispers through generations, in small kitchens and garden paths, in quiet woods and smoky hearths. These village healers were not trained in great schools. They had no degrees or formal studies, but they had something more powerful than parchment and ink. They had memory, and they had observation, and they had deep understanding of the natural world around them. They knew which plants grew at which time of year, which roots should be dug in the early morning, and which leaves must only be plucked after the first frost. The healer was often a woman, though not always. Sometimes she was old with years of experience written into every line on her hands. Sometimes she was younger, having been chosen by the older healer before her and taught in secret over long afternoons and under moonlit nights. The knowledge was sacred, not hidden because of pride, but protected because it was precious and misunderstood by those who did not live close to the soil and the seasons. In the eyes of the villagers, the healer was a mystery, but also a comfort. They came to her with fever, with broken bones, with pain that would not go away, with sorrow they could not name. She did not always have answers, but she had presence, and she had herbs, and she had words and hands that could soothe. She often kept a garden behind her home, or perhaps just a patch beside her door. It was not a grand place, but every plant had purpose. There were rows of yarrow for bleeding, and fever valerian for sleep nettle, for strength mugwort, for dreams, and wormwood. For the restless spirit, she dried bundles of them and hung them from beams. So their scent filled the room with bitter sweetness, a smell of healing, not perfume, but purpose. But the healer also knew more than what grew in the ground. She knew the way to set a broken limb using firm but gentle touch and linen. Soaked in honey, she knew how to prepare a poultice to draw out infection, how to coax a stubborn cough, to ease, how to help a woman through childbirth. When there was no midwife near, she knew how to comfort the dying, how to make the end less frightening. Not all healing came from herbs and plants. The healer also used charms and symbols and quiet prayers, not always because she believed in them, but because the people did. The mind and the spirit were as fragile as the body, and sometimes a whispered phrase spoken while tying a ribbon around a wrist or burning a little wax could carry more hope than any tincture or salve. Her tools were simple and quiet, a mortar and pestle made of stone or wood, small bottles filled with tinctures, wrapped in cloth to keep them cool, a knife for trimming herbs, a spoon for measuring, a cloth for cleaning, and always a warm fire for boiling, for drying, for brewing. She did not need much, because she knew what to do with very little. Though respected, she was also sometimes feared, because she lived a little apart, and because her knowledge seemed too deep, too mysterious for some. There were times when suspicion rose, especially during sickness or crop failure. Some whispered she had caused what she tried to cure. Others said she knew too much. She had seen too much. Her knowledge was a kind of power, and power made people uneasy. Even so, most villagers came to her when they needed help more than they feared her, because pain is stronger than doubt, and the healer always helped, always listened, always gave what she could. Her payment was not in coin, but in eggs, in bread, in a bundle of wool or wood, or sometimes just thanks and respect. Some of her cures worked because they were rooted in generations of trial and memory. Some worked because they eased the mind and gave people something to believe in, and some worked simply because someone had listened, had touched their hand, and said they would help. Her days were long, and not always easy. In the morning, she gathered herbs or tended to her drying plants. By afternoon, she was visiting homes or mixing remedies. By evening, she was boiling roots or preparing tinctures. By night, she was sometimes called in haste to a child who would not breathe or a man who could not sleep. And still she answered. She always answered. She was a keeper of stories and of bodies of pain and recovery. She saw what others did not. She remembered who had what illness, and when she knew what had helped before and what had failed, she did not forget, and that memory became her map through the complex, quiet world of village illness and healing. Her work was not loud or praised. It was not written down or honored with awards, but it endured. It made life bearable and sometimes even beautiful. It gave hope. It gave comfort. It gave healing in the places where it was most needed and least expected. This was the healer, the one who knew what others did not, who held the secrets not out of pride, but out of duty, who passed them on when the time came, so that someone would continue after her. Someone would still be there. When the fever came, when the child cried, when the ache would not fade, someone would still know what to do. And so the healer stayed, the quiet heart of the village, hidden in plain sight, trusted by many, watched by all, remembered by generations, even when her name was long forgotten. The healer's knowledge stretched far beyond the herbs and roots that grew in the fields around the village. She held in her mind a vast collection of stories and lessons learned from those who came before her, mothers and grandmothers, wise women who had listened carefully to the land and the seasons, and had watched closely how bodies healed or failed to heal. This knowledge was not written down in books or taught in schools. It was passed quietly from one to the next, carried in memories, and whispered at twilight and dawn. Each morning before the sun cast its first golden light, the healer would rise and move softly through the misty fields, her footsteps careful not to crush the tender shoots of wildflowers or young herbs. The cool dampness of the earth filled her senses as she searched for the plants she needed. She knew exactly where to find the bitter yarrow that could stop bleeding, and the calming valerian roots that eased restless nights. The plants seemed to speak to her, guiding her hands to the leaves and stems that held the greatest power for healing. Back in her small hut, the healer worked slowly, and with great care. She ground leaves and flowers in her heavy stone, mortar crushing them into fine powders and pastes. With hands steady and practiced, she mixed these with water oils and honey to create potions and salves. Each preparation was made with deep focus and intention, as if the very act of making the remedy gave it strength and power. She believed that love and attention were as important as the herbs themselves, and poured her heart into every bottle and jar. When wounds came from accidents or animal bites, she was gentle but firm. She cleaned the injured skin with clear water, removing dirt and grit before applying honey to keep infection away. The sticky sweetness of honey was both medicine and protection. She wrapped the wounds in linen cloth soft enough to protect, but tight enough to hold everything in place. Her touch was soothing and calm, giving comfort to those who were afraid or in pain. Childbirth was a sacred moment, and the healer was often called to help when no midwife was near. She came quickly, with steady hands and quiet words, guiding mothers through the pain, encouraging each breath and holding their hands when the fear crept in. She carried herbs that eased pain and encouraged safe delivery. She whispered prayers that called upon spirits of protection and life. The arrival of a new child was a miracle she honored deeply and helped bring into the world with reverence. Healing was never only about the body, though it was about the mind and the spirit too. The healer understood that fear and sorrow could make illness worse, and that hope was often the first step to recovery. She would sit with the sick, holding their hands, listening to their stories and fears. Her presence was a balm, her voice soft and steady, singing lullabies or telling stories of heroes who had overcome great odds. She offered comfort when no medicine could touch the deeper pains and helped carry the weight of grief when it became too much. Sometimes her knowledge made others uneasy, especially when crops failed or disease spread fast. Rumors whispered that she had strange powers that could harm as easily as heal. Some said she spoke with spirits or knew secrets best left alone. Fear could turn the village against her, yet even when suspicion grew strong, many still came to her door, seeking help, because pain and illness could not be denied, and her remedies often worked when all else failed. She treated the land with care, gathering only what she needed and always giving thanks to the plants and spirits. She left offerings of bread or milk beside the roots of herbs or near sacred springs, asking for their blessing and guidance. Her healing was a partnership between human and nature, a sacred balance that required respect and gratitude. The earth and the healer were bound together in a circle of life and care that sustained the village. Inside her humble home, rows of jars filled with oils, dried herbs, and powders lined wooden shelves. Each was carefully labeled and stored with purpose. Her tools were simple: a mortar and pestle for grinding, a sharp knife, cloths for cleaning, and a small fire for boiling and brewing. She moved through her space with quiet grace, surrounded by the scents of rosemary, sage, thyme, and lavender. Every breath reminded her of the sacred work she carried out. The healer was also a teacher, passing her knowledge to young women chosen for their gentle hearts and patient spirits. She taught them how to find the right plants, when to gather them, how to prepare remedies, and how to listen deeply to the land and to the people. She shared stories that held wisdom and lessons about caring not just for bodies, but for souls. Her lessons were gifts passed from mother to daughter, healer to apprentice, carrying the past into the future. Her power was not something she flaunted. She knew trust was fragile, and her role was to protect and serve. The healer moved quietly through her days, answering calls for help, carrying the burdens of pain and hope. Alike, she was steady and calm, a presence that many relied upon. Her life was woven into the fabric of the village, a quiet thread holding together moments of suffering and joy. In every small act, every word spoken, and every potion she made, the healer gave the village something precious. She turned humble plants into powerful cures and quiet moments into healing. She was the steady heart of the village, the keeper of ancient secrets and gentle hands that held the fragile threads of life. Her story was written not in books, but in the lives she touched and the hope she carried, like a flame that never went out. Beyond caring for bodies and minds, the healer's role reached into the rhythms of the village. She understood how seasons turned, how weather shaped crops, and how the health of the earth was tied to its people. With changing winds, she adjusted remedies, knowing a herb gathered too soon or too late might lose power. She watched birds in flight and flowers bloom as signs. Her knowledge was a quiet dance with time and nature. She listened to stories carried by wind, whispered through trees and sung by birds, messages for those who knew how to hear. She believed nature spoke in symbols, and that healing was not just fixing, but restoring balance inside and out. When illness came, it showed something was out of harmony, and the healer sought the root, not only the symptom. Visitors from nearby villages sometimes came curious about her strange remedies or whispered prayers. They shared tales of their own healers and cures, and in quiet exchanges she learned and gave. The healing network stretched beyond one place, a living tradition, blending old wisdom with new experience. Her hands were steady in making medicines and rituals that gave hope and meaning. She might draw circles in dirt light, a fire of herbs whispering words that shaped the unseen. Her rituals were simple, but carried deep belief and intention, moments where body, spirit, and community met in quiet strength. When night fell and the village slept, the healer sat by fire alone, or with apprentices. She told stories of great healers, past women and men who walked similar paths. These stories were lessons wrapped in narrative, teaching patience, courage, and listening. They reminded listeners of their sacred work and the trust they held. Sometimes, despite all efforts, the healer faced sorrow and loss. She bore grief for those who lost loved ones or lived with pain she could not ease. In these times, she retreated to woods or rivers, finding solace in flowing water and whispering leaves. She knew healing was not always cure. Sometimes it was presence walking alongside suffering until the end. Her wisdom reached smallest creatures and quiet plants. She taught every life had a place, and respect for nature was true healing. She knew which plants attracted helpful insects, which roots purified soil, and which birds warmed frost. Her vision was wide, seeing connections others missed, a web where every thread mattered. She understood community and how healing was woven into village life. In crisis, neighbors shared food, labor, and support. The healer stood at the center, encouraging kindness. She saw no remedy was complete without care of others. Healing was as much social as medical. She kept careful notes, not in books, but in mind, tracking treatments, changes in land, and illness patterns. She memorized each case, learning what worked and what failed. Her memory was a map guiding through health and disease. She passed wisdom on carefully knowing it was fragile and precious. Despite heavy burdens, the healer found moments of joy. She delighted in spring blooms, fresh herbs, and children's laughter. Her work connected her to life, death, and rebirth, giving purpose. She was guardian of balance, holding village with quiet strength. As seasons turned, she prepared for long winters, gathering roots, drying herbs to last cold months. She taught young how to preserve plants to keep healing flame alive, even when land slept beneath snow. Her preparation was hope, a promise that life would return and healing continue despite dark and cold. The healer's place was unique, a blend of science, spirit, and tradition. She bridged seen and unseen worlds, walking one foot intangible, the other in mystery. Her work was not always understood, but always essential, a thread in village, life holding memories, dreams, and survival. Her hands shaped cures, trust, and connection. Through storms and sun, through plenty and hardship, the healer stayed steady. Her life an offering of service, a commitment to care without expectation. She kept secrets, bore hope, a living bridge between past and future, earth and spirit, pain and peace. And so the healer's story is one of quiet power and deep love, A reminder healing is more than medicine, science, or ritual. It weaves knowledge and heart, community and nature, spirit and body. It is the hand held in dark, the voice that comforts the weary, the flame that lights the way home. The healer lives in land stories and hearts of those who remember. The healer rose before dawn, while the village lay wrapped in quiet shadows. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she wished not to disturb the fragile peace that still clung to the night. Earth beneath her feet was cool and damp from the mist that settled like a soft veil over the fields and forests around her. She carried a small bundle, wrapped carefully in cloth, containing herbs freshly gathered, the few simple tools she needed for her work, and a worn leather pouch filled with small stones and bits of bone that held meaning only she fully understood. As she walked through the dim light, she could hear the faint stirring of birds, awakening their songs, weaving through the air like gentle threads of sound. Her breath was steady, her heart calm, for the day ahead was full of the unseen work that shaped life in the village. Though her hands dealt with broken bones, fevered bodies, and restless spirits, she moved with the grace of one who understood that healing was a dance that required patience and respect for both the living and the land. Her first visits were always to those too weak to leave their homes. The old, the sick, the mothers cradling children burning with fever. She knelt beside them, her eyes soft with kindness, her hands warm and steady. As she placed her fingers lightly on their wrists, she felt the pulse, the faint rise and fall of breath, the subtle shifts in temperature. Each body spoke its own language, and she had learned to listen closely. Her hands knew when to press gently, when to stroke slowly, when to simply be near without words. For the presence of another was often the first medicine a patient needed. The remedies she carried were never merely plants plucked and brewed. They were stories whispered through generations, folded into potions, tied to prayers that wove hope and intention into each drop. When she mixed the bitter leaves of yarrow with sweet honey, or crushed the purple blossoms of lavender into calming salves, she spoke softly of the ancestors, whose knowledge breathed life into the herbs. The act of preparation itself was a sacred ritual that carried power beyond the physical. For the healer understood that the heart must be as engaged as the hands and the spirit as open as the mind. In the village, whispers of her name traveled on the wind, carried in tones of awe or sometimes of suspicion. Some believed she was chosen by the earth and sky, that the very trees and stones had spoken to her. Others looked at her with fear, unsure of the mysterious power she seemed to hold. But when illness or sorrow weighed too heavily on the people, even the most doubtful sought her out. Her door was always open, her welcome never hesitant. She treated all without distinction, knowing that pain made no difference between friend or stranger, rich or poor. Her knowledge was not limited to the remedies she carried. It stretched deep into the rhythms of the natural world. She remembered where the strongest healing plants grew hidden, beneath brambles or near the roots of ancient trees. She knew precisely when to gather them, guided by the moon phases, the turning of the seasons, and the signs in the sky. The flight of birds, the blooming of flowers, and even the shifting clouds all spoke to her in a language of symbols. She read the world around her as a living book, and knew that healing was not only for the body, but for the soul and the land as well. Her apprentices were chosen carefully, young women and men who showed gentleness, patience, and a willingness to listen. They learned not only the names of herbs and how to prepare tinctures, but also the sacred art of watching and waiting. The healer taught them to notice the subtle changes in the leaves, the way a bird's call might signal a shift in weather, and the quiet rhythms of the human heart. She shared stories filled with wisdom lessons in courage and the power of kindness. Their days were filled with gathering herbs at dawn, working by firelight, and passing down secrets older than the village itself. There were days of quiet celebration, when a child's fever broke, or a mother safely brought new life into the world. Moments when a man returned to his fields, or a woman walked without pain. These triumphs filled the healer with deep gratitude and reminded her that healing was a circle sometimes. Slow, sometimes sudden, but always fragile and precious. Yet loss was part of her life too. She sat beside the dying, offering comfort with gentle hands and soft words. Holding the hands of those whose time had come, she helped families prepare for the inevitable. She performed rituals that spoke of hope beyond the eyes of the living, whispering of spirits and journeys unseen. Grief and grace were held tenderly in her heart and shared with those who mourned. At night, beneath a sky full of stars, the healer often sat alone by the fire, reflecting on the plants she gathered, the lives she touched, and the mysteries that still eluded understanding. The land itself seemed to breathe life and secrets in the rustling leaves and flowing rivers. She found strength in this stillness, ready to face the coming days of healing once more. Her story was not one sung in great halls or written in grand books. It was a story of quiet courage and deep love. Every small act of kindness held the power to change a life. She was a keeper of secrets, a guardian of ancient wisdom, a witness to the fragile beauty of life. Her spirit lived on in every home, where pain was eased and hope was given a steady flame glowing bright in the heart of the village. Her role stretched beyond the individual bodies she tended. It reached into the very fabric of the village life. She understood that health was woven from the threads of community kindness and shared responsibility. She encouraged neighbors to care for one another, to share food labor and stories. Healing was not just medicine, but a social act that connected everyone. Her presence was a living thread, holding together moments of joy, suffering, and hope. The healer was also deeply connected to the cycles of the earth. The changing seasons marked her work, and her wisdom guided her through the year. She prepared carefully for the long, cold winter's gathering. Roots and drying herbs to last through months when the land slept beneath snow. Her teachings passed on the importance of preserving life and knowledge, so the flame of healing would never be extinguished, even in the darkest times. In the quiet moments between healing, she found joy in the simple things the first. Blossoms of spring, the taste of fresh herbs gathered at dawn, the laughter of children playing in the fields. Her work connected her to the endless cycles of life, death and rebirth, reminding her of the fragile balance that sustains all living things. Her hands shaped not only remedies, but also trust. She built bonds with the villagers through her steady presence, her unwavering care. Her life was a constant offering, a sacred service given without expectation. Yet the gratitude and respect she received were gifts that nourished her soul. The healer was a bridge between worlds, the seen and unseen, the tangible and mysterious. Her work was a blend of knowledge, spirit, and tradition, a living thread in the story of the village, a story that carried forward through generations. She held the past and the future together, weaving them into the present moment, where healing took place in the touch of a hand, the scent of a plant, and the whisper of a prayer. Through storms and sunshine, through times of plenty and hardship, she remained a steady presence, her life a quiet light, a source of hope and comfort, a living testament to the power of care and the strength found in gentleness. The healer's legacy was not written in stone, but lived in the hearts of those she touched in the healing she made possible, and in the unbroken chain of those who would come after her to carry the secrets forward. As twilight deepened over the village, and the stars began to shimmer in the slowly darkening sky, the healer stood quietly beneath the great oak that had witnessed countless seasons come and go. Her hands, worn by years of gathering, grinding, and soothing, rested gently against the rough bark, feeling the steady heartbeat of the ancient tree beneath her fingertips. It was here, in the stillness between day and night, between life and rest, that she felt the weight and the wonder of the legacy she would soon pass on. She thought back to the very first day she had stepped into this role, a young woman with eager eyes and trembling hands, entrusted with the sacred knowledge of those who came before her. The stories told in whispers around hearth fires, the delicate touch of leaves and petals, the quiet prayers murmured when no one else was listening. All these memories were threads woven tightly into the fabric of her being. Now, as the dusk wrapped the village in its velvet embrace, she saw the faces of her apprentices gathered near the fire. They sat with their eyes wide, hearts open, ready to carry the flame forward. To them she would hand the secrets of the earth, the wisdom of the plants, the patience to listen, the courage to stand in silence with those who suffer. The healer's voice rose soft and steady, a gentle current flowing through the night air. She spoke of the sacred balance between nature and humankind, a dance that had endured since time immemorial. She told them that healing was not just an act of mending broken bodies, but a sacred dialogue between the seen and unseen, the physical and the spiritual, the individual and the whole. Remember, she whispered, that every leaf you gather carries the story of the sun and the rain, the wind and the soil. Every root you pull holds the memory of the earth's deep patience. Healing is not a hurried thing. It is a slow unfolding, like the dawn breaking softly over the hills, or the quiet growth of a seed beneath the frost. Her apprentices nodded, their faces glowing in the firelight, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. They had learned the names of herbs and their uses. Yes, but more importantly, they had learned how to listen. To listen to the breath of the sick, to the rhythm of the seasons, to the silence between words. Healing was a language, spoken not only with words, but with touch, with presence, with heart. Outside, the village settled into quiet sleep. The steady breathing of those resting under simple wooden roofs echoed the slow, patient pulse of life itself. The healer looked out across the fields where wildflowers still bowed their heads under the gentle weight of evening dew. Somewhere in the darkness, the scent of sage and lavender drifted through the cool air, a whispered promise of morning and renewal. She thought of the long winters when snow blanketed the earth in silence, and the people leaned on her knowledge and steady hands more than ever. The days when children's coughs echoed too loud in the stillness, when the old remembered the taste of healing teas from summers long past. She recalled the stories shared by traveling merchants and wandering storytellers, tales of distant lands where healers moved with the same quiet power, gathering from the wild, speaking to spirits, and walking between worlds. The healer's heart swelled with gratitude for this invisible web of knowledge and care that stretched far beyond their little village, a tapestry of healing hands and open hearts that connected people across time and space. In the flickering firelight, she saw herself not as a lone figure, but as part of a long line of guardians. Guardians of the fragile balance between body and soul, between sickness and health, between despair and hope. This was a role both heavy and light, heavy with responsibility, light with the joy of service. She spoke to her apprentices of the power of stories, how healing stories carried a magic all their own, stories of survival, of resilience, of courage in the face of pain. When you heal, she told them, you become part of a story greater than yourself. You carry the hopes of those who came before and those who will follow. Tell their stories well. Hold their pain with gentle hands. Offer their lives back with kindness. The night deepened and the air grew cooler, but the fire blazed on, a circle of light in the darkness. One apprentice after another stood to light their small fires from the central flame, their faces illuminated by the glow, their eyes shining with newfound purpose. Each flame was a promise, a pledge to honor the healer's legacy, to tend the fragile gift of life with care and respect. The healer felt a calm peace settle over her. The path she had walked for so many years was now being traced by others, each step a part of the endless dance of healing. She knew that, while her hands might soon rest, the healing flame would burn brighter than ever, carried on by those who understood its sacred power. As the embers glowed softly, the healer closed her eyes and breathed in the night air, rich with the scent of earth, wood smoke, and the promise of dawn. She felt the heartbeat of the land beneath her feet, the pulse of the village around her, the gentle rhythm of life itself. She smiled softly and whispered a silent prayer of thanks to the earth, the sky, and all the unseen forces that had guided her journey. And in that quiet moment, the healer's story did not end. It flowed forward like a gentle stream, a quiet light in the dark, a steady hand reaching out to those in need. The village lay peaceful beneath the stars, cradled by the night. The healer's flame flickered softly, a beacon of hope, healing, and enduring love, a light that would never fade.